Working the night shift is often quiet and uneventful, or so you'd think. But what if the silence is hiding something darker? Imagine receiving a desperate phone call from someone who doesn't exist, or picking up a passenger who vanishes into thin air. And what would you do if a shadow followed you through the aisles of an empty warehouse? These are more than just stories. They're eerie encounters that will make you think twice about the night shift. Ready to hear what happened? Let's dive into 3 chilling tales that might just keep you up tonight.
Working the night shift as a cab driver wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. The streets were quiet that night, the kind of eerie silence that made you hear your own thoughts a little too clearly. It was past midnight when I spotted her, a woman standing at the corner of a dimly lit street, wearing a long white dress and holding a small purse. I slowed down and rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" I asked. She didn't say a word, just nodded and climbed into the back seat. The air filled with a faint scent of jasmine, which struck me as odd, sweet yet unsettling. "Where to?" I asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. She handed me a folded piece of paper with an address scribbled on it. I didn't recognize the street, but I figured GPS would guide me. The drive was unusually quiet. Every time I glanced back, she sat perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the window. I felt an inexplicable chill creep down my spine. "Long night?" I joked, hoping to break the silence. She didn't respond. As we drove further, the city lights faded behind us, replaced by winding roads and thick mist. My unease grew when the GPS started acting up, its robotic voice insisting, recalculating route. I tried to focus on the road, but the unease was relentless. Then I noticed something strange. No houses, no streetlights, just endless rows of gravestones stretching into the misty darkness. My heart pounded as I realized we were in the middle of a cemetery. I mustered the courage to ask, "Are you sure this is where you want to go?" Silence. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as the mist thickened, swallowing everything ahead. Then a light tap on my shoulder. I nearly jumped out of my seat, but managed to pull over. Without turning around, I felt her hand brush mine as she passed me a few bills. I heard the door open and close. When I finally dared to look back, the back seat was empty and she was gone. Shaking, I stuffed the money into the ashtray and sped off. I didn't stop until I reached home. It wasn't until the next morning that my curiosity got the better of me. I checked the cash she'd given me and froze. They weren't bills, but Chinese hell notes, used as offerings for the dead. Still in disbelief, I drove back to the cemetery, determined to find the address she'd given me. There it was, a fresh gravestone with her photo staring back at me. The inscription read, "In loving memory of our daughter, taken too soon in a tragic accident." The jasmine scent lingered in my car for days after. I stopped driving the night shift soon after that. Some nights, though, when the city is quiet, I think about her, and I wonder if she ever found her way home. I've worked the night shift at a small office building for years. It's not glamorous, but the solitude has its perks. Until that night. It was around 2 a.m., and I was in the middle of a report. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above me. Suddenly, the phone on my desk rang. Not my cell phone, mind you, but the old landline we hardly used anymore. I picked it up, expecting a wrong number. "Hello?" I said. There was silence at first, then faint static, followed by a woman's voice. "Help me," she whispered. I froze. Her tone was desperate, trembling. "Who is this?" I asked. "Please, he's here," she said, her voice cracking. Then the line went dead. I stared at the receiver, my heart racing. Maybe it was a prank, I told myself, but something about her voice felt real. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the unease. Minutes passed, and then the phone rang again. I hesitated, but eventually picked up. "Hello?" This time, it was just static. I strained to listen, hoping for some explanation. Then I heard her again, faint but clear. "Don't let him find me." "Who are you? Where are you?" I demanded. The line went dead again. By now, my nerves were shot. I checked the caller ID, but it only displayed a jumble of numbers, nothing traceable. I decided to call the building's security guard, Mike, to let him know. As I reached for my cell phone, I heard footsteps echoing down the hallway. They were slow, deliberate, and getting louder. My office is on the 10th floor, and at that hour, there shouldn't have been anyone else here. I stepped out, calling, "Mike, is that you?" No response. The footsteps stopped, and the silence was deafening. I returned to my desk, locking the door behind me. My hands were trembling as I called Mike. The line rang, but no one answered. I decided I'd had enough. Grabbing my bag, I prepared to leave the building. That's when the phone rang a third time. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. Before I could say anything, the woman's voice whispered, "It's too late, he's there." At that moment, I felt a cold draft sweep through the room, even though the windows were sealed. My instinct screamed at me to run, so I bolted out of the office. The elevator was slow, so I took the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding in my ears. When I reached the ground floor, I found Mike sitting at his desk. He looked up, startled. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't answer, just muttered something about feeling sick and hurried to my car. The next morning, I couldn't shake the events of the night before. I tried calling the number back, but it didn't exist. Later that day, I learned that years ago, a woman had been attacked in that very building while working late. Her attacker was never caught, and some say her spirit still haunts the halls, warning others of a danger she couldn't escape. I switched to the day shift after that. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the faint echo of footsteps and wonder if she's still trying to warn someone else. I used to work the graveyard shift at a warehouse. The job was simple: monitor the CCTV cameras, do occasional rounds, and make sure nothing went wrong. It was boring, sure, but it paid well, and I liked the quiet. One night, as I settled into my shift, sipping a cup of coffee, something on the monitors caught my eye. In one of the aisles between the towering shelves, a shadow moved. It was subtle, just a flicker at the edge of the frame. I leaned closer, thinking maybe it was a glitch. But then it moved again, swift, deliberate. "Probably just a stray cat," I muttered, though deep down, I knew that wasn't likely. The warehouse was sealed tight after hours. Still, I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the aisle to check. The warehouse was massive, its silence amplified by the hum of the fluorescent lights. My footsteps echoed as I approached the aisle where I'd seen the shadow. "Hello? Anyone here?" I called out, hoping for no reply. The aisle was empty, just rows of neatly stacked boxes. I shined my flashlight up and down, even checking behind the pallets. Nothing. Feeling uneasy, I headed back to the control room, convincing myself it had been my imagination. But when I looked at the monitors again, the shadow was back. This time, it was at the far end of the warehouse, near the old loading dock. It didn't move like a person. It was too fast, too fluid. My skin prickled as I watched it disappear into the darkness. I debated calling my supervisor, but decided against it. I didn't want to sound paranoid. Instead, I went to investigate again, gripping the flashlight tightly. The loading dock was colder than the rest of the warehouse, the air heavy with an unplaceable smell, like damp earth. My flashlight beam swept across the walls and floor. "Anyone here?" I called again, my voice echoing back to me. That's when I heard it. A faint, low whisper. It wasn't words exactly, more like the sound of someone breathing close by. I spun around, shining the flashlight wildly, but there was no one there. The whisper grew louder, closer, until it seemed to come from right behind me. I turned sharply, and for a split second I saw it. A tall, shadowy figure with no discernible features, just darkness shaped like a person. Then it was gone. I didn't stick around to investigate further. I ran back to the control room, locked the door, and sat there, trembling. The monitors now showed nothing but the empty aisles of the warehouse. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the long hours were playing tricks on me. But when I reviewed the footage the next morning, the shadow was there, clear as day, darting through the aisles and disappearing into the loading dock. I showed it to my supervisor, but he just shrugged it off, saying, "Must be a technical glitch." I quit a week later. I don't know what I saw that night, but I've heard stories from other night shift workers about the shadow. They say it's been seen for years, always around the loading dock. No one knows what it is, but I'll tell you this: I'm glad I don't work there anymore.